My father and brother used my lowest moment to publicly humiliate me and my poor boyfriend at a lavish engagement party. They thought they had finally broken me, so I let my billionaire partner stand up and end their careers. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The fever had been raging for 3 days, leaving me a shivering, exhausted shell of myself. Pneumonia, the doctor had said, a direct result of pushing myself too hard in the freezing autumn rain, trying to save the last of the experimental frost-resistant crops before the deep freeze set in. My lungs felt like they were packed with shattered glass every time I drew a breath, and my head pounded with a dull, relentless rhythm that made the simple act of keeping my eyes open a Herculean task. I was bundled under 3 heavy quilts on the worn sofa in the small farmhouse I shared with Mason, the fire in the hearth, the only thing holding back the biting chill of the November evening. Mason was out, having driven 3 towns over to secure parts for a supposedly broken tractor, a cover story he used when he needed to personally handle high-level meetings for his actual company without drawing the suspicion of my profoundly judgmental family. I was entirely alone, drifting in and out of a restless, sweat-drenched sleep, when my phone vibrated violently against the wooden coffee table. I groaned, weakly reaching an arm out from the warmth of the blankets. My vision blurred as I stared at the screen. It was a missed call from my brother, Ryan. Before I could even process the irritation of seeing his name, a notification popped up. He had left a voicemail. Or rather, his phone had failed to disconnect after I didn't answer. With a trembling finger, I pressed play, pressing the speaker against my ear. At first, there was only the muffled sound of a car engine and the faint rhythm of a jazz station on the radio. Then, my brother's voice, sharp and dripping with his usual arrogance, cut through the static. "I'm telling you, Dad, it's the perfect time," Ryan was saying, his voice slightly distant as if the phone was sitting in the cup holder. "Caroline's father is fully on board with the merger, but he wants collateral. He wants to know we have tangible assets to back up the expansion. And you're sure about the old property?" That was my father, Owen. His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. Just hearing his baritone sent a fresh spike of a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the fever. "Absolutely," Ryan laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "Sophia is sick as a dog anyway. She can barely manage that pathetic little greenhouse of hers, let alone the entire acreage. We announced the sale of the estate at the engagement party on Saturday. We frame it as a bold step into the future of the family. We signed the preliminary intent papers with Caroline's dad right there in front of everyone. It'll make me look like a visionary." There was a long, excruciating pause on the recording. I stopped breathing, my chest tightening with a sudden, suffocating panic. The estate, my home. The land I had bled into for a decade, the land my grandmother had explicitly promised would always be my sanctuary, though she had foolishly left the legal deed in my father's name for tax purposes. "What about Sophia?" Owen asked, not out of concern but purely logistical annoyance. "She'll make a scene, you know how she gets about that dirt." "Let her," Ryan scoffed. "What is she going to do? Hire a lawyer with the pennies she makes selling artisan tomatoes. We evict her next month. She can go live in a trailer with Mason. It's where that dirt farming loser belongs anyway. It's time she faced reality, Dad. She's an embarrassment. We need this capital to secure the partnership with Caroline's family, and I'm not letting Sophia's pathetic farm fantasies ruin my future." "Agreed," Owen said, his tone final and cold. "The engagement party it is. We cut the dead weight." The recording beeped and went silent. I lay there, the phone slipping from my damp fingers to fall onto the rug. The silence in the small house was suddenly deafening. My own family. My father, who I had spent my entire life trying to please, and my brother, whose debts I had helped pay when we were younger, were casually plotting to render me homeless and strip away my life's work in front of 70 guests just to impress a wealthy investor. The physical agony in my chest was suddenly eclipsed by a profound, agonizing shattering of my heart. The room spun, and a hot, bitter tear tracked down my feverish cheek. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The morning sunlight was pale and indifferent as it filtered through the frosted window panes, casting long, sharp shadows across the hardwood floor. I was still on the sofa, wrapped in the quilts, staring blankly at the dead ashes in the fireplace. The voicemail played on a loop in my mind, a toxic mantra that poisoned every thought. My fever had broken slightly in the night, leaving me weak and hollowed out, but my mind was racing with a terrifying, icy clarity. When Mason walked through the door just after dawn, smelling of cold air and expensive hotel soap, a lingering trace of his secret corporate life, he took one look at my face and dropped his travel bag. He rushed over, his large, warm hands gently framing my face. "Soph, what's wrong?" "You look worse than yesterday," he said, his dark eyes filled with genuine panic. Mason, the man my family thought was a simple farmhand struggling to make ends meet, was the most grounded, fiercely protective person I had ever known. "They're taking the farm, Mason," I whispered, my voice cracking, barely audible. I explained the voicemail, every cruel word, every dismissive laugh. I watched the transformation in his eyes. The soft, worried gaze of my partner hardened into something sharp and dangerous. The CEO of a billion-dollar agricultural empire, a man who ruthlessly negotiated with international conglomerates, briefly flashed beneath his flannel shirt. "We can buy it," he said immediately, his voice low and firm. "I'll make an anonymous offer through one of the holding companies today. Double whatever Caroline's father is offering. We won't let them take your home." "No," I said, grabbing his wrist. "If you buy it anonymously, they still win. They get the money, they get the status, and they think they crushed me." I took a shaky breath, the anger finally burning through the fog of illness. "I want them to try it. I want them to try and do it in front of everyone." Before Mason could reply, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway shattered the quiet. We both looked out the window to see a gleaming, silver Mercedes SUV pulling up to the edge of the dirt path, deliberately parked far enough away to avoid the mud. "Speak of the devil," Mason muttered, his jaw clenching. "It was my father, Owen." Mason helped me sit up, wrapping an extra blanket around my shoulders, before stepping back to lean against the kitchen counter, adopting his best, simple laborer posture. The door opened without a knock. Owen stepped inside, bringing a gust of freezing air and the suffocating scent of expensive cologne with him. He looked around the cozy, rustic room with barely concealed disgust, his eyes lingering on the muddy boots by the door and the worn fabric of the sofa. "Sophia," Owen said smoothly, not moving an inch closer to me. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored charcoal overcoat and a silk scarf, looking wildly out of place in our farmhouse. "You look terrible. Have you seen a real doctor, or are you just drinking herbal tea and hoping for the best?" "I have pneumonia, Dad," I said, keeping my voice utterly flat. "I'm on antibiotics." "Right, well," he sighed, checking his gold Rolex. "I don't have long. I came to ensure you are well enough for Saturday. Ryan's engagement party is the most important night of his life, and by extension, this family's future. Caroline's family will be there, including her father, who is a very prominent man. I expect you to be there, and I expect you to look presentable." His eyes slid past me to where Mason was standing quietly by the counter. Owen's lip curled in a familiar, condescending sneer. "And you," Owen said, addressing Mason as if he were a particularly slow child. "If Sophia insists on bringing you, I suggest you find a suit that doesn't smell like fertilizer. Keep your mouth shut, stay in the back, and try not to embarrass us. The people at this party actually run the world, they don't just shovel its dirt." Mason simply smiled, a calm, perfectly pleasant smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be sure to wear my Sunday best, sir. Wouldn't want to upset the important folks." Owen huffed, clearly annoyed by Mason's lack of intimidation. He turned back to me. "Saturday, Sophia, don't be late, and try to put on some makeup. You look like a ghost." Without another word, he turned and walked out, carefully avoiding a puddle on his way back to his luxury SUV. I watched his car disappear down the road, the silence returning to the room. The absolute audacity of the man, standing in my home, demanding my attendance at an event designed solely for my destruction. They thought I was weak. They thought I was ignorant. They thought they held all the cards. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand the sheer magnitude of Owen's arrogance, you have to understand the history of our family, a history he spent every waking moment trying to rewrite. We were not old money. We were not aristocratic. The wealth we had originally came from the very soil Owen now despised. My grandfather had built a successful, albeit modest, regional farming operation. When he passed, my grandmother tried to maintain it, but she was aging and overwhelmed. That was when I stepped in. I was 18, fresh out of high school with a full scholarship to a prestigious botany program. I deferred my enrollment, taking night classes at the local community college instead, so I could keep the farm afloat. I spent the next 10 years breaking my back, learning the intricacies of modern horticulture, modernizing our irrigation, and transforming a dying traditional farm into a highly lucrative supplier of specialized, organic produce for high-end restaurants. I paid off the lingering debts. I paid for my mother's medical bills when she got sick, while Owen was busy networking at country clubs. And Ryan was the golden child. 4 years younger than me, he was shielded from every hardship. While I was up at 4:00 a.m. checking greenhouse temperatures, Ryan was being handed keys to a new sports car and a fully funded ride through a private university. Owen idolized Ryan because Ryan wanted to be exactly like Owen, a man who produced nothing, created nothing, but moved money around and demanded respect for it. Owen was the primary antagonist in the story of my life, a man entirely constructed of smoke and mirrors. He was a wealth manager and real estate developer whose primary skill was losing money gracefully. He relied on the illusion of success to attract clients, maintaining country club memberships and leasing luxury cars while quietly drowning in leverage. His tailored suits were armor against the reality of his own mediocrity. He looked polished, yes, but it was a disingenuous sheen. He constantly spoke in vague, grandiose terms about synergy and acquisitions, masking the fact that he hadn't closed a successful, independent deal in 5 years. His latest obsession, and his supposed salvation, was Caroline's father. Caroline was Ryan's fiancée, a perfectly nice woman, but to Owen and Ryan, she was merely a key. Her father ran one of the largest agricultural logistics and distribution networks in the Midwest. Owen's grand plan was to force a partnership by offering the family land, my land, as a cornerstone asset for a new regional distribution hub. It was a desperate play by a desperate man trying to secure his position in a wealthy circle he didn't truly belong to. For years, Owen had made a sport of belittling me. He hated the farm because it reminded him of his own working-class roots. He hated my profession because he viewed physical labor as a moral failing. He would invite me to his sterile, modern townhouse for dinner just to make pointed comments about the dirt under my fingernails or to loudly question why a woman of my intelligence was wasting her potential playing in the mud. When Mason came into the picture 3 years ago, Owen's cruelty found a new target. I had met Mason at an agricultural tech convention, a convention he was keynote speaking at, though I didn't know it at the time. When we started dating, Mason, who cherished his privacy and despised the sycophants his wealth attracted, suggested we keep his corporate identity quiet for a while. We presented him to my family simply as a man who worked in farming. Owen immediately labeled him a poor dirt farmer and treated him with a level of disrespect that was breathtaking to witness. And now, this. The engagement party wasn't just a celebration of Ryan and Caroline, it was an execution block. They were going to use the gathering of 70 influential guests, including Caroline's father, to publicly announce the liquidation of my life's work, knowing I would be too humiliated, or perhaps too sick, to fight back in front of a crowd. They were relying on my silence, my adherence to polite family norms to smooth over their theft. As Saturday approached, my fever finally broke, replaced by a cold, burning energy. I didn't just feel better, I felt dangerous. I spent the next 2 days not resting, but preparing. I made phone calls. I dug through old files. And I spoke extensively with Mason, who, behind his warm smile and flannel shirts, was meticulously aligning the crosshairs of his own corporate artillery. The transition had happened. I was no longer the passive, dutiful daughter taking the abuse to keep the peace. I was a woman defending her home, and I was walking into the lion's den with a trap they could not possibly comprehend. The realization that my own father and brother were actively plotting my ruin acted as a strange sort of medicine. The lingering fatigue of my pneumonia was pushed aside by a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I was not going to simply roll over and allow them to pave my grandmother's legacy into a concrete loading dock. I needed leverage, and I needed to understand exactly how Owen planned to pull this off legally, considering the intricacies of my grandmother's estate. On Wednesday morning, the frost was thick on the greenhouse panes as I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of black tea. I had pulled out every dusty cardboard box of financial records I possessed. Mason sat across from me, his laptop open. He was supposed to be fixing the old combine harvester, but instead, his fingers were flying across his keyboard with the practiced speed of a man used to commanding a vast corporate network. "Okay, let's look at the deed first," I said, my voice still slightly raspy but steady. I pulled a thick, yellowed envelope from the bottom of the oldest box. Grandma left the deed in Owen's name to avoid a massive inheritance tax hit because she trusted him to keep it in the family. But she was meticulous. She wouldn't have just handed him the keys to the kingdom without a safeguard. I carefully unfolded the heavy parchment. I read through the dense legal jargon, my finger tracing the lines, until I hit a section buried deep on the 3rd page. My breath caught in my throat. I read it again, and then a 3rd time, just to be absolutely certain my tired eyes were not deceiving me. "Mason," I whispered, sliding the document across the scratched wooden table. "Look at this clause, right here." Mason leaned in, his dark eyes scanning the text. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across his face. "An agricultural preservation easement," he read aloud, his voice rich with quiet triumph. "It clearly states that as long as the property is actively and profitably cultivated for agricultural purposes, the deed holder cannot unilaterally alter the zoning, sell to a commercial developer, or liquidate the asset without the express, notarized consent of the designated primary agricultural operator." He looked up at me. "And you are the designated operator." "He can't sell it," I breathed, feeling a massive weight lift from my chest. "He literally cannot legally promise this land to Caroline's father for a distribution hub without my signature. The intent papers he wants to sign at the party are entirely fraudulent." "Exactly," Mason said, leaning back in his chair. "But it gets better, Sophia. I had let's call them friends in finance, do a quiet sweep of your father's public records and credit history this morning. Owen isn't just making a power play. He is drowning." Mason turned his laptop to face me. The screen was filled with spreadsheets and highlighted figures that made my stomach churn. "Your father's wealth is a complete illusion," Mason explained, his tone shifting to the clinical precision of a CEO dissecting a failing competitor. "He has taken out 3 separate, highly predatory loans against his townhouse in the city. His luxury cars are all leased, and he is 3 months behind on the payments for 2 of them. His wealth management firm hasn't onboarded a new client in over 4 years. He is burning through cash just to maintain the appearance of being rich." I stared at the numbers, the reality of my father's pathetic, hollow life washing over me. "So, this partnership with Caroline's father is a lifeline," Mason finished for me. "He desperately needs the massive influx of cash and the perceived credibility of a merger with Caroline's family to keep his own creditors at bay. He is selling them a ghost. If Caroline's father looks closely at Owen's books, he'll see a black hole of debt. Owen is using Ryan's marriage as a financial bailout." The trap was set. Owen was walking onto a stage made of rotten wood, and he had no idea I was the one holding the match. The opportunity to test the waters came sooner than I expected. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Owen, demanding that I meet him and Ryan for a family planning lunch at a pretentious, ridiculously expensive bistro downtown. I knew exactly what this was, an attempt to lay down the law and dictate my behavior for the engagement party. I arrived at the restaurant wearing a simple, clean sweater and jeans, standing in stark contrast to the sea of tailored suits and designer dresses around me. I spotted them in a corner booth. Owen was wearing a pristine navy suit, adjusting his silk tie, while Ryan sat beside him, animatedly checking his expensive watch. I slid into the booth opposite them. Neither of them offered a greeting or asked how I was feeling. "Good, you're here," Owen said, not bothering to look up from his menu. "I took the liberty of ordering you a salad. You need to fit into whatever dress you're wearing on Saturday. Now, let's get straight to the point." He folded his hands on the white tablecloth, leaning in with a practiced, intimidating glare. "Saturday is a critical night. Caroline's family is very traditional, and her father is a man of immense influence. I will not have you wandering around looking like a stray dog, and I certainly will not have you talking about your little gardening projects." Ryan scoffed, taking a sip of his sparkling water. "Seriously, Sophia, don't embarrass me. Keep your mouth shut, smile, and for the love of everything, do not bring that dirt-shoveling boyfriend of yours. He smells like a barn, and I'm not having him ruin the aesthetic of my engagement photos." I sat perfectly still, letting their insults wash over me. A few days ago, this would have crushed me. Today, it was just background noise. I looked directly at my father, holding his gaze until he shifted uncomfortably. "Tell me, Dad," I said, my voice low, steady, and loud enough for only our table to hear. "How exactly do you plan to explain the agricultural preservation easement to Caroline's father when you try to sell him my farm?" The silence that hit our table was absolute. The background clatter of silverware and polite conversation seemed to fade away. Owen's face, usually a mask of smug superiority, instantly drained of all color, turning an ashen, sickly gray. What are you talking about?" Owen stammered, his polished facade cracking in an instant. "The easement," I repeated slowly, enunciating every syllable. "The clause in Grandma's will that explicitly states you cannot sell or develop the land without my notarized consent. Did you think I would never read the deed to my own home?" Ryan looked back and forth between us, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "Dad, what is she talking about? You said you own the land free and clear. You said we were signing the transfer intent on Saturday." Owen's shock quickly morphed into cornered, desperate rage. The veins in his neck bulged against his tight collar. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Sophia," he hissed, leaning across the table, his eyes wide and frantic. "That clause is ancient. It's unenforceable. I have lawyers who can crush that little piece of paper in 5 minutes." "I don't think you do," I replied calmly, taking a sip of my water. "Because lawyers cost money. And according to your public financial records, you are currently juggling 3 separate predatory mortgages on your townhouse and hiding from the repo men for your leased Mercedes. You are millions in debt, Dad. You are completely broke." "Shut up," Owen snapped, his voice rising enough to draw a concerned look from a passing waiter. He slammed his hand flat on the table, rattling the silverware. "You are an ungrateful, lying, delusional girl. You are jealous of Ryan's success, and you are trying to sabotage him with these ridiculous fabrications." "Are they fabrications?" I asked, looking at Ryan. My brother looked pale, his eyes darting around nervously. "Ask him to show you his portfolio, Ryan. Ask him to show you the actual balances, not the printed summaries he creates himself." "Don't listen to her, Ryan," Owen commanded, his voice shaking with poorly suppressed panic. He pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You listen to me, Sophia. You will attend that party. You will stand in the back, and you will keep your mouth shut. If you breathe a word of this insane fantasy to Caroline's family, I will have you physically thrown out of the venue, and I will have my crew bulldoze your precious greenhouse by Monday morning." Do you understand me?" He was terrified. His threats were sloppy, loud, and entirely empty, but he was too arrogant to realize I could see right through him. I didn't answer him. I simply stood up from the booth, dropped a $20 bill on the table to cover my uneaten salad, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them to marinate in their own panic. My father was not a man who took a threat to his ego lightly. By Friday morning, less than 24 hours before the party, he made his desperate countermove to regain control. I was in the far greenhouse, carefully cataloging the survival rate of the frost-resistant seedlings, when I heard the heavy rumble of diesel engines. I stepped out into the freezing morning air to see 3 large, commercial surveying trucks parked haphazardly across the front lawn, their heavy tires tearing deep, muddy trenches into the carefully manicured grass. A team of men in neon vests was already unloading tripods and laser measuring equipment, loudly calling out coordinates. It was a blatant, aggressive intimidation tactic. Owen wanted to show me that he held the physical power, that he could carve up my sanctuary whenever he pleased. Before I could even walk over to confront them, the barn doors swung open. Mason emerged, wiping axle grease from his hands with a rag. He didn't look angry, he looked dangerously calm. He walked with a steady, unhurried pace toward the lead surveyor, a burly man with a clipboard. I hurried over, standing just behind Mason's shoulder. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Mason asked, his tone perfectly polite, though his posture was rigid and commanding. "We're here on behalf of the owner, Owen," the lead surveyor barked, not looking up from his clipboard. "We're laying the initial boundary markers for the new commercial zoning plot. We need you to move those trucks out of the way." "I'm afraid there's been a miscommunication," Mason said smoothly. "This property is currently under a strict agricultural preservation easement, and there is an active legal dispute regarding the deed. Any commercial surveying or alteration of the land is a direct violation of state property codes. If you place a single marker on this soil, I will have you all cited for trespassing and unauthorized development, and I will personally ensure your firm loses its municipal licensing." The surveyor finally looked up, his eyes narrowing as he took in Mason's flannel shirt and grease-stained hands. He clearly intended to laugh him off, but something in Mason's eyes, the absolute, unwavering certainty of a man who routinely destroyed entire corporations before lunch, made the man hesitate. "I have a work order," the surveyor said, his voice losing its bravado. "And I have an attorney on speed dial who will tie your company up in litigation for the next decade," Mason countered evenly. "Pack up your gear and leave, now." The surveyor looked at Mason, looked at me, and then muttered a curse under his breath. He waved his arm at his crew. "Pack it up. We're not getting paid enough to deal with a legal mess." Within 10 minutes, the trucks were gone, leaving only the deep, muddy scars on the lawn. The victory was satisfying, but it was short-lived. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long, gloomy shadows across the fields, the roar of a sports car engine shattered the quiet. It was Ryan. He marched up the porch steps and hammered his fist against the front door until I opened it. He looked frantic, his hair disheveled, the tailored elegance of his usual appearance completely unraveled. "What is wrong with you?" Ryan screamed, pushing past me into the hallway. "Dad is having a complete breakdown. The surveyors called him and said you threatened to sue them. Are you actively trying to ruin my life, Sophia?" I closed the door calmly. I walked over to the hall table, picked up a thick manila folder I had prepared earlier that afternoon, and held it out to him. "I am trying to save your life, Ryan," I said quietly. "Dad is using you. He is using your marriage to bail himself out of bankruptcy. Look at these papers. These are the actual, verified public records of his debts, the foreclosure notices, the liens, read them." Ryan stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. He shook his head violently, taking a step back. No, I'm not looking at your fake documents. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous that Dad loves me more, that I'm actually successful while you play in the dirt. You're trying to sabotage the biggest deal of our family's history because you're bitter and alone." "Ryan, please," I pleaded, my heart breaking for him despite everything. "He is lying to you. He is lying to Caroline's father. If you sign those papers tomorrow night, you will be complicit in massive financial fraud. They will destroy you when they find out. The only one who is going to be destroyed is you." Ryan shouted, his face red with a desperate, terrified anger. He slapped the folder out of my hand, sending the papers scattering across the hardwood floor. "Tomorrow night is going to be perfect. Dad is going to announce the deal, we are going to secure our future, and you are going to sit in the corner and watch us win. And after tomorrow, you are dead to me." He turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass panes rattled in their frames. I stood in the quiet hallway, looking down at the scattered proof of my father's lies. Ryan had made his choice. He was too deeply entrenched in the illusion to save himself. The loyalty to his family was entirely one-sided. I bent down, slowly gathering the papers back into the folder. I felt no more sorrow, no more hesitation. I had tried to warn him. Now, there was nothing left to do but let the fire burn them to the ground. Tomorrow was the engagement party. And I was going to wear my best dress. The drive to the Grandview Country Club took exactly 45 minutes, but sitting in the passenger seat of Mason's heavy-duty farm truck, it felt like a lifetime. The evening was bitterly cold, the sky a bruised, cloudless purple that promised a hard frost by midnight. I stared out the window at the passing silhouettes of bare trees, my mind cycling through a dozen different scenarios, each one ending in a spectacular public collision. I was wearing a deep emerald green dress, a vintage piece that had belonged to my grandmother, simple, elegant, and completely devoid of the flashy, modern labels my father so desperately worshipped. Beside me, Mason drove with his usual relaxed, steady grip on the steering wheel. He had foregone the flannel and work boots, dressed instead in a sharply tailored midnight blue suit that draped flawlessly over his broad shoulders. He didn't look like a man who shoveled dirt. He looked like a man who owned the earth beneath it. When we pulled up to the valet stand, the attendant visibly hesitated before approaching our dusty truck, his eyes darting to the line of gleaming luxury sedans and sports cars parked along the sweeping circular driveway. Mason simply handed him the keys with a polite nod and offered his arm to me. We walked into the main ballroom, and the sheer, overwhelming opulence of the event hit me like a physical wave. Owen had clearly spared absolutely no expense, or rather, he had maximized every line of credit he had left to create an illusion of limitless wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, golden light over 70 impeccably dressed guests. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided across the polished marble floors, balancing silver trays of champagne and intricately crafted hors d'oeuvres. At the far end of the room, an elaborate ice sculpture of a swan melted slowly beside a towering display of imported orchids. It was a masterpiece of financial deception. We found our seating assignments on a gilded board near the entrance. Predictably, we were placed at table 12, the absolute furthest table from the head family table, tucked neatly into a shadowy corner near the swinging doors of the kitchen. It was an intentional slight, a geographic representation of my standing in the family. I didn't care. It gave us a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire room. I watched as my father worked the crowd. Owen was in his element, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, laughing loudly, clapping men on the shoulder, and radiating a toxic, manufactured charm. He spent the majority of his time hovering near Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was a massive, imposing man with a thick shock of white hair and the shrewd, unforgiving eyes of a man who had built a logistical empire from the ground up. He looked slightly bored, indulging my father's frantic networking with polite, non-committal nods. Ryan and Caroline were seated at the center of the head table. Caroline looked beautiful and genuinely happy, oblivious to the fact that her future father-in-law was planning to use her marriage as a human shield against bankruptcy. Ryan, however, looked pale and rigid. He kept shooting nervous, terrified glances in my direction, his hands trembling slightly every time he raised his water glass. He knew the axe was suspended directly above his head. He just didn't know when it would fall. Dinner was a drawn-out, excruciatingly tense affair. I pushed the expensive, expertly seared filet mignon around my plate, the rich aroma suddenly turning my stomach. The string quartet in the corner played a subdued classical piece that did nothing to mask the underlying hum of pretentious conversation. I felt the weight of a dozen judgmental stares from my extended family members, aunts and uncles who had bought into Owen's narrative that I was the eccentric failure of a daughter. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my expression neutral, drawing strength from the warm, solid presence of Mason sitting beside me. As the plates were cleared and the waiters began pouring coffee and a fresh round of champagne, the ambient noise in the ballroom began to settle. The moment had arrived. At the head table, Owen stood up. He adjusted his silk tie, smoothed the lapels of his custom suit, and picked up a silver spoon. He tapped it against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, high-pitched clink, clink, clink echoed across the vast room, immediately silencing the 70 guests. All eyes turned to him. He smiled, a broad, victorious, terrifyingly arrogant smile. "Family, friends, esteemed guests," Owen began, his deep baritone voice carrying effortlessly over the crowd. He possessed a natural theatricality, a polished cadence that made people lean in and listen. "We are gathered here tonight in this magnificent venue, not just to celebrate the union of two wonderful young people, but to celebrate the joining of two great families. Two legacies of ambition, of drive, and of unparalleled success." He gestured expansively toward Arthur Pendleton, who offered a brief, restrained nod in return. "I have always believed that a man is measured by the legacy he leaves behind, and by the children he raises to carry that legacy forward into the modern age," Owen continued, his voice swelling with manufactured emotion. He turned his gaze down to Ryan, placing a heavy, affectionate hand on his son's shoulder. "Ryan, my boy, you have exceeded every expectation I ever placed upon you. You are a titan in the making. You understand the value of a dollar, the art of the deal, and the importance of expanding our family's footprint. To our successful son, our pride and joy." The room erupted into polite applause. Glasses were raised. Ryan managed a tight, uncomfortable smile, his eyes darting frantically to me again. Owen waited for the applause to die down completely. He took a sip of his champagne, his eyes scanning the room until they found me, sitting in the shadows at table 12. The warm, fatherly facade instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating cruelty. This was the moment he had orchestrated. This was the public execution. He smirked at me, his voice dropping slightly, laced with a venomous pity designed to humiliate. "And you," he said, the microphone amplifying the sheer condescension in his tone. "Still in love with that poor farmer, still playing in the dirt while the rest of us build the future." A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed through the ballroom. The polite smiles on the faces of the guests froze. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, looking down at their laps, mortified by the blatant, unprovoked cruelty of the patriarch. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with second-hand embarrassment and shock. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't lower my eyes. I kept eating my small slice of chocolate dessert, entirely silent, chewing slowly and deliberately, holding his gaze across the sea of tables. The absolute stillness of my reaction seemed to unnerve him for a fraction of a second, a flicker of doubt crossing his polished features. Before Owen could open his mouth to deliver whatever final, crushing blow he had prepared, the heavy scrape of a chair moving against the marble floor shattered the silence. Beside me, Mason stood up. He didn't rush. He buttoned the center button of his tailored jacket with infuriating slowness. He stood at his full, imposing height, his dark eyes locked not on Owen, but on the head table. At that exact moment, Arthur Pendleton, who had been staring down at his coffee cup, looked up. He squinted across the dimly lit room, his brow furrowing in confusion. He adjusted his glasses, leaning forward over the table, his eyes widening in sudden, absolute shock. Arthur pushed his chair back with a loud screech, practically scrambling to his feet. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my table, his voice booming across the silent ballroom, completely bypassing Owen. "Wait," Arthur blurted out, his voice cracking with a mixture of disbelief and deep, professional reverence. "That's you, Mason Caldwell, the the CEO of Horizon Agricultural Holdings. Then the whole room went dead quiet. It was a silence so profound, so absolute, that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigeration units in the kitchen behind us. The air was entirely sucked out of the room. Owen froze, his champagne flute hovering inches from his mouth. The smug, victorious smirk literally slid off his face, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed, uncomprehending horror. He looked from Arthur to Mason, his brain desperately trying to process a reality that completely contradicted his entire worldview. "Arthur, what are you talking about?" Owen stammered, his polished baritone suddenly weak and reedy. "This is Mason. He's a farmhand. He drives a tractor." Arthur didn't even look at Owen. He was staring at Mason as if he had just seen a ghost. "A farmhand? Owen, you absolute fool," Arthur scoffed, his voice ringing with disgust. "Horizon Agricultural Holdings owns 80% of the commercial farmland in a 3-state radius. They control the patents on the drought-resistant seed technology my entire supply chain relies on. I have been trying to secure a 10-minute phone call with Mr. Caldwell's executive assistant for 6 months." Arthur quickly navigated around the head table, ignoring the stunned guests, and walked rapidly toward our table. He extended a hand, his demeanor instantly shifting to one of deep respect. "Mr. Caldwell, I had no idea you were connected to this family. It is an absolute honor." Mason shook Arthur's hand firmly, his expression polite but guarded. "A pleasure, Arthur, though I wish the circumstances of our introduction were a bit more professional." "I don't understand," Owen whispered, his voice trembling as the sheer magnitude of his error began to crush him. He gripped the edge of the table, looking physically ill. "Sophia, you said he was poor, you said." "I never said he was poor, Dad," I spoke up, my voice clear and calm, carrying across the silent room. I stood up, placing my napkin on the table. "I said he worked in agriculture. You made the assumption that working with the earth was beneath you. You made the assumption that because he didn't flaunt his wealth like a cheap parlor trick, he must not have any." I walked slowly toward the center of the room, feeling the eyes of all 70 guests tracking my every movement. I stopped a few feet from the head table, looking directly at my father. He looked small. He looked terrified. "But since we are airing out the family's financial realities in public, Dad, I think it's only fair we discuss yours," I said, my voice steady, betraying no emotion. I turned my gaze to Arthur Pendleton. "Mr. Pendleton, my father invited you here tonight to announce a joint venture. He intends to offer you a massive plot of prime agricultural land to serve as collateral for a new distribution hub, correct?" Arthur, still standing near our table, nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing with sudden suspicion. "Yes, that was the preliminary agreement we were meant to sign this evening. It was the cornerstone of the merger." "He doesn't own it," I stated clearly. The whispers erupted immediately, a frantic, hissing chorus sweeping through the tables. "Sophia, shut your mouth." Owen hissed, lunging forward, his face flushed a dark, dangerous red. "Don't you dare ruin this." "The land is protected by an ironclad agricultural preservation easement," I continued, raising my voice slightly to cut through the noise, never breaking eye contact with Arthur. "It cannot be zoned for commercial development, and it cannot be sold without my explicitly notarized, legal consent as the designated operator. Consent that I have not and will never give. The intent papers he planned to have you sign tonight are entirely fraudulent." Arthur Pendleton's face darkened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He turned slowly to look at Owen. "Is this true, Owen? Were you attempting to drag my company into a fraudulent land transfer?" "Arthur, please, let me explain. It's just a minor legal hurdle. I have lawyers," Owen pleaded, his hands shaking, sweat beading on his forehead. "Don't bother." Mason's voice cut through the room like a steel blade. He walked up to stand beside me. "Because even if you could break the easement, Owen, you have nothing left. Arthur, my firm ran a standard, quiet diligence check on Owen's public financials earlier this week. He is carrying 3 predatory, high-interest mortgages on his townhouse. His vehicles are leased and in arrears. He has less than $10,000 in liquid capital. He was using this fraudulent land deal and his son's marriage as a desperate attempt to secure a cash injection from your family to avoid imminent bankruptcy. The silence returned, but this time it was heavy, suffocating, and final. The illusion was shattered. The smoke had cleared and the mirrors were broken. 70 guests sat in stunned silence, bearing witness to the absolute, undeniable destruction of a man who had built his entire life on lies. The fallout was immediate, brutal, and remarkably swift. Arthur Pendleton did not shout. He did not make a scene. He simply walked back to the head table, placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, and said quietly, "Caroline, we are leaving. Now." Caroline, looking utterly bewildered and heartbroken, stood up. Ryan reached out to grab her hand, his eyes wide with panic. "Caroline, please. I didn't know the extent of it, I swear." "Don't touch her," Arthur snapped, his voice vibrating with a quiet, lethal rage. He looked down at Ryan with utter disgust. "If you ever approach my daughter again, or if your father attempts to contact my offices, I will have my legal team bury your entire family in so much litigation you won't be able to afford the dirt you were trying to steal." With that, Arthur escorted a weeping Caroline out of the ballroom. Within minutes, the rest of the guests began to stand up, quietly gathering their coats and slipping out the doors, unable to look my father in the eye. It was a mass exodus of the social elite he had so desperately tried to court. Owen collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands, a broken, hyperventilating shell of a man. The grand, opulent ballroom meant to be his crowning achievement was now a hollow, echoing monument to his ruin. Mason and I didn't stay to watch him cry. We walked out the front doors, the freezing night air hitting my face, feeling cleaner and lighter than it had in years. We got into the truck, and as we drove away from the country club, I let out a long, shuddering breath. The war was over. Over the next 4 weeks, the consequences of that night unfolded with the ruthless efficiency of falling dominoes. Without the Pendleton merger to placate his creditors, Owen's financial house of cards collapsed entirely. The banks moved in with staggering speed. His luxury townhouse in the city was foreclosed upon. The leased Mercedes SUVs were repossessed from his driveway in the middle of the day. The State Bar Association and financial regulatory boards opened investigations into his attempt to facilitate a fraudulent land transfer, effectively destroying whatever remained of his professional reputation. He was forced to move into a cheap, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, facing mountains of legal debt and total social exile. I didn't gloat. I didn't call him. I simply returned to my farm, to my greenhouses, and to the quiet, hard work that actually meant something. It was late on a Tuesday afternoon, the winter sun casting a weak, golden glow over the frozen fields, when a battered sedan pulled into the driveway. I was on the porch, wrapped in a heavy sweater, drinking coffee. I watched as Ryan stepped out of the car. He looked exhausted. He was wearing jeans and a simple jacket, the polished, arrogant, mid-level executive demeanor completely stripped away. He walked up the steps slowly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He stopped a few feet away, unable to meet my eyes. "The bank finalized the foreclosure on Dad's place today," Ryan said quietly, his voice raspy. He's gone, Sophia. He's totally broken." "I know," I said softly. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a profound, settling peace. Ryan finally looked up, his eyes rimmed with red. "Caroline won't return my calls. Her father threatened to have me arrested if I went to her apartment. I lost my job at the firm because of the association with Dad's fraud investigation." He swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping. "You were right, about everything. He used me, he lied to me, and I let him do it because it was easier than actually working for a living." He took a shaky breath, tears pooling in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Sophia, for the things I said, for not stopping him, for treating you and Mason like you were nothing. I was so arrogant, I was so stupid." I looked at my younger brother, seeing past the cruelty of the last few years, seeing the scared, misguided boy who had desperately wanted the approval of a toxic father. The anger I had held onto for so long felt suddenly useless. "You were stupid, Ryan," I agreed gently. But you're out from under his shadow now. You get to decide who you want to be from this day forward. I stood up, walked over, and pulled him into a tight, fierce hug. He tensed for a second before breaking down entirely, sobbing into my shoulder as the last remnants of our father's toxic legacy washed away. It was the first step on a very long road to healing, but it was a step in the right direction. Later that evening, Mason and I stood by the edge of the large pasture, watching the sun dip below the tree line, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and violet. The farm was quiet, safe, and entirely mine. Mason wrapped a warm arm around my waist, pulling me close against his side. "So," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "What's the plan for tomorrow, boss?" I leaned my head against his shoulder, looking out over the land that had survived the storm. "Tomorrow," I smiled, feeling the deep, resonant truth of the word, "we plant the new seeds."